Why is it legal in the US to buy guns and vote at 18 but not buying alcohol until 21? I actually studied this in school for a paper. You won't like the answer. In the 70s, Michigan lowered the drinking age to 18 for about 8 years. The University of Michigan and other Michigan universities studied the effects after 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and 20 years. IIRC. You can still find the studies if you search. The outcomes were fairly disastrous. 1. Drunk driving went up a lot. Driving fatalities and permanent injuries went up. It was something like 1,520% increase in alcohol-related traffic accidents for teenagers. 2. Underage drinking rates stayed the same. That is to say, instead of 18-20-year-olds getting beer in college, it was now 15-17-year-olds getting beer in high school. 3. Alcohol-related illnesses and problems went up, and stayed up for the people who developed them. The entire cohort of people roughly aged 10 to 20 when it first was legalized has significantly higher rates of alcoholism, liver failure, joblessness, homelessness, school failure, domestic abuse, sexual assault, criminal convictions, etc. These increased rates for this same group of individuals remained even 20 years later. They became alcoholics. They stayed alcoholics. So, the data pretty universally showed that the lives of citizens were overall worse. In many cases permanently, for basically no real benefit. This is greatly exacerbated by the fact that the U.S. is heavily reliant on automobiles, which creates immediate problems without walkable cities and public transportation. The problem of traffic accidents, injuries, and fatalities immediately get worse, and they're more likely to directly affect teenagers. So Michigan changed it back to 21. They initially did it just because of the traffic accident data, with all the long-term health effects only being identified later. And all those problems went back to where they had been before the drinking age was lowered. But not for the people who were aged 10-20. Their poor health outcomes remain poor. No, the above problems do not exist in other countries where the drinking age is 16-18 and has been for decades or longer. Those other countries do not have the adolescent drinking culture that was and essentially still is present in the U.S. that overly values binge drinking to the point of insensibility or vomiting. They also are more likely to be able to walk or take public transportation home and tend to live in more densely populated areas. So they just don't have the same problem with drunk driving. So, in order to correct the cultural problems ingrained in contemporary culture necessary to avoid the above problems, we would need to establish a much healthier drinking culture in this country. Only a better drinking culture can safely have a lower drinking age. But we can't develop a better drinking culture without everyone having already grown up in a culture that doesn't treat drinking the way the US already does. Do you want to risk sacrificing your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren so that maybe in 60 to 80 years or more it won't be a problem? Inflict on them higher rates of death, disease, injury, and being the victimized or traumatized just so that you can have a beer a few years earlier? It's a catch-22 to fix it, and the cost is very high to try. Good question. There are far more alcohol-related deaths among young people compared to firearm-related deaths. This is true even if you include suicides. The drinking age used to be 21 after Prohibition. It dropped down to 18, 19, 20 across different states during the 1970s because it was seen as a right privilege given to adults. As it dropped, researchers noticed more traffic accidents that they correlated to the decreased drinking age. Organizations like MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, lobbied for an increased minimum drinking age. Reagan supported this and Congress passed the National Minimum Drinking Age Act in 1984 that withheld federal highway funding to states that had a drinking age lower than 21. TLDR. Research, lobbying, and nationwide data to show a correlation between lower drinking ages and higher traffic accidents. Interesting info. Federal law was passed 1984 to punish states that didn't limit purchase and possession of alcohol up to 21 years of age. They did this by limiting highway funding to the state. Before this, voting was lowered to 18 from 21 in 60s, and handguns were also 21 years old requirement. In 70s, basically age requirements for a lot of things changed. I could be wrong on some of this, but think most is correct. Best to have 3 years of sober practice shooting your new rifle. The simplest answer is that 18-21-year-olds were more likely to drink and drive. Then there was a political activist organization called Mothers Against Drunk Driving that pushed for states to raise their drinking ages and push for the federal government to pass quasi-laws. Threats to withhold funding, mandating that states raise their drinking ages. Because the U.S. has a problem deciding when someone is an adult. We also have a problem with lobbyists. Alcohol is a mind-altering substance. Buying guns and voting isn't. Going to the army at 17, not sure, and death penalty starting at 10 in some state. This has always puzzled me too. I'm Australian, and the age for drinking is 18, as it is in the majority of the world. We certainly have a hard drinking culture, and underage drinking is a real thing. Despite strict laws where a lot of places will ask everyone regardless of age for ID. And the only ID acceptable are driver's licenses or passports. And yet we don't have the same issues that America has with drink driving, etc., which is really interesting. What are the repercussions of getting caught drink driving in the States? I know ours here are pretty harsh. Personally, I feel that if you are considered to be an adult in every other aspect, driving, voting, paying taxes, then you should be allowed to make your own decisions regarding drinking. I could potentially understand if the age was 19, but an additional 3 years when you're technically an adult is a lot. American laws are made kind of independently of each other, each subject to their own lobbying and political considerations, which are described very well in other comments here. There isn't any body that tries to make sure that the laws, when taken holistically, are consistent or make sense. At 18 you may be able to buy a gun, but you have to be 21 to buy the ammunition. America is confusing. Alcohol is a serious problem in America that no one wants to admit, work on. Guns and voting are constitutional rights for adults. Alcohol is not. Because owning a gun and voting are rights inherent to the human condition, and getting loaded on Thunderbird on a Tuesday afternoon is not. Because the gun lobby keeps fighting efforts to raise the gun age to 21. I'd also like to point out it's legal for parents to buy guns for their children. Because America. Duh. Welcome to the United States of America.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. TooAfraidToAsk is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.